Ready? Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Laura Thompson and I am the Head of Community Services for the Meriden Library. I'd like to thank you for joining us for this virtual discussion with our New York Times bestselling author, Waite Clayton. Tonight, we'll be discussing her novels, The Last Train to London and The Postmistress of Paris. This presentation has been made possible by the generous donations made to the Friends of the Meriden Public Library to support the library's Temple B'nai Abraham World War II Holocaust and Genocide collection. This program would not be possible without the efforts of a few organizations and individuals. We're so grateful that months of collaboration made this program possible. First, I want to thank the Bloomfield Public Library for asking to collaborate. And I want to give a special shout out to the librarians that are on with us tonight, Miss Mara Whitman and Miss Sheila McCallum. Next, I would like to thank Temple Adath Israel and give a special thank you to Miss Roberta Glass. The interest and support both you and your book club have given us has made events like this possible, and it's really what keeps us going. Last but not least, I would like to thank Voices of Hope and Kathy Fishman for your support. We have collaborated in the past, and we are so tremendously grateful for the guidance and support that Voices of Hope has given us, for connecting me with Ruth, who is just wonderful, and for assisting us with programs like this. You really have made our program quality so much better by being involved, and we just really hope to keep this collaboration going. Now, I do want to say a special thank you to Ruth. I met through Voices of Hope, and I just want to say that, Ruth, you have been a light for me. You have been a joy to work with, and it's just so special that a program like this that was basically a thought from you during a meeting during the summer, that we got to see this through and that we've had the success that we've had. I am just so humbled by working with you, and I learn something from you every time we speak. So I just want to say thank you for being you. And with that, I want you to take it away, Ruth.
Put this on in this.
Okay. Ruth, are you there? Let's see.
Ruth is there, but she's muted.
And I'm looking for her. I've lost you. Oh, I've got you. So you've got to just press the unmute button, or am I asked to unmute?
I must have gotten muted accidentally.
Yes, but you are
okay.
Clear.
Am I clear now?
You are clear and you are front and center.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Let me begin again. Let me start by returning the compliment. Working with you also has been just a complete pleasure. And I'm filled with admiration for all the things that you do. Not the least among them, your whole understanding and concern for issues concerned with the Holocaust and the work that you've done in making this event happen. So let me return the thanks and the appreciation. And let me go on to tell you a little bit, all of you who are here, about our brilliant speaker of the evening. Waite Clayton is not just a national figure, she's an international figure, and someone that we are just truly fortunate and blessed to have available to us this evening. She was born in Washington, D.C. She got her advanced education at the University of Michigan, and she didn't leave until they gave her a law degree. She then became a lawyer, a wife, a mother, and I'm quite sure a very good one. And that was not quite enough. She went on to write numerous articles for prominent newspapers, but that's not quite enough. So she decided to write not one, not two, but 8 outstanding novels. 8, that's a lot of books. Each of them is a book of great quality. Each of them takes on a major theme of the human condition, which she then juxtaposes against a challenging situation or a challenging historical background or something which is equally fascinating and page-turning. These books have won her wide recognition. They've earned her multiple literary awards or nominations for awards. And I'm very happy to say that one of the books we're talking about tonight, Last Train to London, received the Jewish Book Award. And it kind of blew my mind when I learned that that book had been translated into 20 different languages, 20. Her exciting plots, in addition to being page turners, show a high regard for historical integrity. And she engages in meticulous research. Her characters express strong messages of social justice, of personal heroism, of being willing to express personal truths that are unpopular. These books are special. They are a unique contribution to literature. Wow, what a record of accomplishments. We are so fortunate to have her with us this evening. I would like personally to highlight one more talent of our multi-talented writer. Last Train to London has as its setting one of history's most perplexing questions. It's a question that I encounter frequently, and I teach about the Holocaust. How did something as horrific as the Holocaust get started? How did it ever gain the momentum to become the unique cataclysm that it did? The book deals with Hitler's annexation of Austria and with the immediate drastic persecution of Austria's Jews. It also chronicles at the same time the successful efforts of those who managed the Kindertransport and through its aegis to save thousands of Jews. Thousands of Jewish children. That's the dramatic setting for one of the few positive stories to come out of the very terrible time. And I need to add personally, this is also a very personal story. I was born in Vienna in 1931. I lived in the environment that Meg Clayton Powell describes. And sometimes when I was reading the book, I truly had the feeling she must have been looking over my shoulder, kind of questionable since she hadn't been born yet. The book so aptly describes places and scenes and people. And yes, by the way, I actually owe my life to the events of the Kindertransport. And what does all this have to do with tonight? The book, with all its complexities, is an amazing amalgamation of true historic reportage in the person of the heroine, Truth Weissmiller, and then in the compelling fictional characters whose voices speak so eloquently. It provides an amazing tapestry of interwoven authentic history and validating fiction. Let me give you a few small examples. There is a brilliant and totally accurate description of hordes of Nazi troops freshly off a train that arrived at the Westbahnhof in Vienna, the connecting rail line to Germany. and who arrive in the form of a majestic parade down Westbahnstrasse into the heart of Vienna, accompanied by a marching band and flags and open vehicles, and welcomed by the ecstatic crowds of Austrians. It was an unforgettable sight, impossible to unsee. And how do I know that it's so accurate? I lived exactly 1 block from Westbahnstrasse. It was the main drag of my neighborhood, where we did our daily shopping. And it was described with a precision that I cannot for the life of me fathom. Or Stefan, the fictional hero, in one of his conversations talks about having to make himself invisible to survive the dangers of the street. Boy, could I relate. My best friend and I, at age 8, took not 1, but 2 trolleys in an hour-long ride to get to the Jewish school, which was the only school that we were allowed to attend. The trolleys invariably were full of Nazis who were only too happy to cause trouble wherever they could. We solved the problem by calling ourselves what? The Invisible Twins. And then we tried to act out that role all the way to school and all the way home. And I know I'm not remembering this by mistake. My friend recorded it in her adult journal. And lastly, Herr Perger stands in one of the ubiquitous, interminable lines at the bureau that's making the arrangements for children to leave on the Kindertransport. He describes the culture of these lines, which was quite unique. It is not what you normally expect of a long, endless queue. And they were queued up to save lives. This was not for, some unique Christmas product. My mother, a very highly experienced line stander, in her memoir, describes the lines in almost the same way. How does even a brilliant, gifted writer have the insight to place such truth in the mouths of her characters and such actuality and realism in her settings? I wish I knew. So with that, let me immediately turn us over to the person who does know. I'm so honored to present to you this evening from California, Meg Waite Clayton.
Hi, everybody. Ruth, that was beautiful. I always feel when anybody like you is at these things that I would rather sit back and let you speak. So I want to start by saying that the reason I could write this novel is because so many people shared their stories in many different ways, including on the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum website, in oral histories and in writing and many ways. And so it is because of people like you, Ruth, that I can do this. And thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to do a little screen share here, and let's see. Let me start with this so I can share some images with you. There we go. Okay. Let's see. Oh, these are all this is not where I was going to start, but these are some of the many translations that Ruth was talking about. And I have to say, it's such an honor to have this story reach people who I can't even, say hello to. So, but that's not where I'm going to start. Let's see if I can get this to work right. I'm going to start there. And I'm going to start by asking you guys to just kind of quietly think to yourself what this would be. Usually if we were in person, I would have you shout it out, but this is a complicated time. So as you're shouting to yourselves, I would like to have you I would like to just thank everybody involved in this, Lauren and Ruth and just everybody. This is kind of a crazy time, and I confess that my days are not that different than they always have been because, you know, I spend them in my imaginary playhouse office, which you see here, hanging out with my imaginary friends, writing stories. But I do miss so many people in this complicated time, and so it's really nice to connect. And I hope you all will have lots of lots of questions and put them in the chat. And what I really want to do is have a good time with you all. So this is a Band-Aid box. I'll tell you that in all the research I did, seeing this was one of the most moving. I actually stood in front of it for several moments weeping. It seems like such a weird thing to get emotional over, but the docent where I saw it said, yeah, the Band-Aid box, it gets everyone. So you guys, I know a lot of you have read the book. Hopefully most of you have read the book, so you're probably scratching your heads trying to remember a Band-Aid box in the book, so I'm gonna let you off the hook and say, there isn't one. By the time I saw this, it was too late for me to work it into the story, but it is a photo of an actual Band-Aid box that was put in a suitcase 80-some years ago, sent by parents with their child going on a train to live in England without them to escape Hitler. And that's obviously what the Kindertransport was, a British effort begun in late 1938, just after Kristallnacht, to rescue 10,000 children from the Reich in what would be the last 9 months before World War II. Somebody is not muted, and it's not a big thing, but it's it'll cause I think it'll cause me to cut in and out. So great. So I'm going to talk for maybe 20 minutes, go through some images to give you a little more sense of the book. And so go ahead and post questions in the chat wherever you want, because I do want to talk about what you all are interested in. So I'm going to skip. Okay, we'll start here. Usually, again, I would say raise your hand or shout out if you know who this is. And while you were doing that, I would thank the NIOD in the Netherlands for allowing me to use this photo. You all have read this, so you probably know that this is Truus by Smoller. She's Dutch. She's a real life hero on the scale of Oscar Schindler of Schindler's List fame. And she played a huge role in the Kindertransport. And then was so completely forgotten that not even anybody at HarperCollins in the Netherlands, which published this book in Dutch, had ever heard of her until they'd read my book. So I'm going to start a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about where the novel started. Spoiler alert, not with Truus. And about the real story behind it, including how hard it was to dig out some of the real history on which it's based. I'm going to skip through a couple slides here that I'm not going to share you guys, but I will tell you that they are usually a shout out to how much librarians and teachers inspire me and how they made me a writer. So just skip them here. Okay. So, Last Train to London, as most of you know by now, I think, is based on the true story of the Kindertransport effort to rescue 10,000 children from Nazi-occupied Europe before World War II began, and the one extraordinary woman who led the effort. The best introduction I have to the novel, and I like to share it because it gives you some real footage of some of the Kindertransports, and it's only about 30 seconds long, so I'm just going to play it for you here. Okay, Last Train to London is often described as Truus's story, but as I said, it didn't begin for me with Truus. It began for me a decade ago when my usually chatty teenage son arrived home troublingly silent. He was a really joyful kid. He was known in the neighborhood for literally riding his bike down the street whenever he was coming home, even sometimes quite late at night, singing at the top of his lungs. And he had a beautiful voice, so there was that. This night, he was totally quiet, and it turned out that he had just come from our local children's theater where he'd interviewed someone like Ruth, who was separated from her family when she was 9 years old. So I first began to learn about the Kindertransport effort in order to help him understand what he was learning, which had moved him to silence. Nick and his theater friends would go on to interview 4 women who were saved by the Kindertransport effort: Ellen Fletcher, Helga Newman, Elizabeth Miller, and Margot Lowbry, who I'm really delighted to say is now a very close friend of mine. But before they could write their play, the director had in mind, the director died of stomach cancer. The kids began to scatter off to colleges, as kids do. My son was the youngest among them, and they never did write their play. But I was left haunted by this story. I was left trying to imagine if I could, as a parent, turn my child over to strangers, allowing them to be taken to another country where they didn't know the language or the customs, or even have anyone to love them. I was left trying to imagine what it was like to be those kids, to leave everything they knew and loved behind. So for most of the time that I was learning about the Kindertransport, reading books, watching documentaries, eventually watching, listening to, and reading interviews with the people involved in the effort, including many rescued children, I wasn't thinking I could write a book about an attempt organized primarily by Jewish leaders in Britain, including Simon Marks of Marks and Spencer and Norman and Helen Bentwich, to try to bring mostly Jewish children from Nazi-occupied Europe to safety in England, many years before I was born. But so here's a little secret: I'm not Jewish. I'd learned fairly early on about Nicholas Winton. He'd led the Prague rescues, which gave me the idea that there must have been somebody leading the Vienna rescues as well. So I went searching and found, finally, really years into this exploration, the name Truus Weissmuller. After I had her name, I found an online entry for Truus in Righteous Among Nations, and it didn't even include the word Kindertransport, so I didn't find it the first time I was Googling. But it told me that Truus's big advantage was that she was a Gentile with access to the Nazi power structure. So I'm not Jewish, but neither was Truus. Neither were a lot of people who risked their lives to help others. And so, oddly as daunting as Truus is, when I learned of her, I was suddenly less daunted about taking on the story. So here's another little secret: I'm not Dutch either. And that did pose a bit of a problem when it came to my research, but I'll go through that when I get to it. So the story, The Last Train to London, you all know, I hope, is in some ways 3 stories. It's the story of the many people in England involved in making it happen. It is the story of Truus and those on the ground in Vienna who made it happen. And it is that story of the children and their families. And that's where I started writing it, where it had started for me, with the children and their families. I surrounded myself with photos of some of the real children, including this girl, to create my 2 teenage characters, Sophie, Len, and Stefan. Sophie, as you guys know now, is a teenage math prodigy, the child of anti-Nazi journalists and a Christian. You might notice that this girl isn't a teenager. She's also not the same nationality, religion, or even hair color as my character of Sophie. But when I saw this photo, I felt so much compassion and love pour out of me. And I took that and poured that emotion into my Sophie Len. I didn't actually know who this girl was the whole time I was writing, and I didn't want to know because I was fictionalizing this. And when I first found this photo on the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum site, it identifies her only as refugee girl. But after I finished the book and it sold, I went looking and found in the Bullmash collection at Kenyon College that she is Helga Kreiner from Berlin. And she was on the first transport that came from Berlin on December 2nd of 1938. So as you know, Sophie meets a boy. His name is Stefan. And again, this is not necessarily Stefan, but this photo is the photo that allowed me to pour the affection that I got from this photo into my Stefan, my little aspiring playwright who, unlike Sophie, has lots of friends. These children, Stefan and Sophie, are based on hundreds of hours of research about the real children involved in the Kindertransport. But of course, they don't exist anywhere but in my mind on the page, and if I've done my job right, in the reader's mind. One of the benefits of historical fiction rather than straight history is it invites us to sort of step into other people's shoes, to live their lives. So I hope through this novel, not just to teach people what the Kindertransport was or what that moment in history was like, but to allow them to feel it. And I hope it makes us feel, take into our hearts what it means to close borders to refugees and to close our hearts to people in need. And I hope also, and this is where truce especially comes in, to help us feel how amazing acting courageously and selfishly can be. So Sophie and Stefan do, as you guys know, things kids do everywhere, like ride this Ferris wheel in Prater Park. They become sweet on each other, of course. I'll tell you that I didn't actually mean for them to be anything but friends, but teenagers will be teenagers, and they kind of got away from me. Stefan's father owns a chocolate business, and because, well, if I'm writing about a Viennese chocolatier, then in the name of research, of course, I have to taste every bit of chocolate that comes my way. So actually, the real reason that I wanted to show that the Jewish population of Vienna before the Anschluss was integrated into Vienna society and prosperous, and a chocolate business was as evocative way as I could think to allow readers, shall we say, a taste of that. Before Hitler invaded Austria, more than half of Vienna's bankers, lawyers, and doctors were Jewish, along with half of its journalists. Hitler was just across the border and anti-Semitism was on the rise. But here's the thing. At first, Hitler was seen as a joke. Even after he was made Chancellor of Germany, people thought it was a madness that would pass. He was across the border at first from people in Austria. It was hard for people leading these comfortable, prosperous lives to imagine that this madness would cross into their own country and that their businesses and homes and lives would be at risk. Until he wasn't, until he was riding through Vienna, as Ruth just described, with crowds cheering him. So the change that occurred in Germany over many years. It took only a few months in Austria. When 1938 opened, Austria was a free country. Its Nazis largely imprisoned. In March, he invaded, and in November, Kristallnacht happened. I will tell you that from a novelist standpoint, having that compression of time is very helpful, and so that is part of the reason that I set the book in Vienna. So Stefan's father, his chocolate business has underneath it, as you guys know, this amazing underground world, and it is real. There are tunnels of various sorts, some natural, some man-made, some sewers, as Stefan wanders through. There is truly, as it says in the book, an underground area, 3 stories that used to be a convent, and an area that used to be a Talmud school. And there is even truly a place that was an underground a horse stable like Stefan stays in. There's a crypt, like this one here. There's a crypt. There's the crypt. And not all the bones are in coffins. So what better place for a teenager to try to kiss an infatuation than in the dark underground where scary guys like Orson Welles hang out? That is seriously Orson Welles in the Vienna Underground. It's from a movie filmed in the tunnels under Vienna just after the war. So it was a really great resource for me to see what they actually looked like then. Honestly, one of the loveliest things about being a writer is being able to read all afternoon and call it work, and occasionally even get to watch old movies and call that work too. So 1938, Hitler crossed the border, takes Austria. People in Vienna begin to realize they need to leave. But by then, of course, borders were closing around the world. Not to everybody, but to Jewish people whose passports Germany was soon stamping with the red J, adding Sarah for women and Israel for men, as if a whole people could be dismissed in a single name. They could have left then if they had someplace to go, but mostly they didn't. I'm going to say I'm really sorry. Somebody whose thing says they are E.S. Workman is not muted, and that's kind of coming through. So if you could just hit your mute, that'd be great. After Hitler invaded Austria, desperate parents began running ads like this in the British papers. This says, urgent, director of Viennese chocolate factory, whose circumstances are sadly depleted due to the political situation, is extremely anxious to place his son with refined and charitable family. Boy, age 10, is of bright and happy disposition. You'll note that this ad is for a Viennese chocolate maker. I will tell you that I had already made Stefan's father a chocolatier when I found this ad, and it's not, it's representative of how very many ads there were like this at the time. And into this void of children in peril steps Truce. She'd begun rescuing children from Nazi Germany by the time the novel opens in the ways that you see, but in small numbers. And the people organizing the Kindertransport hope to rescue thousands. For a long time, I was trying to find stuff about her, and my research was showing absolutely nothing. And then in December of 2016, so literally 8 years after I'd first learned of the transports from my son, I came upon this notice of a publication of a biography of sorts of Truce. Despite the notice being very conveniently in English, the book was only ever published in Dutch. It was 50 years out of print by the time I was looking for it, with no copies for sale anywhere in the world, and only a half dozen copies in US libraries. The closest to me, I will tell you, I'm in California, the closest one was in Minnesota, 2,000 miles away. But lucky for me, my older son's university across the country had a copy. He had just begun a PhD program, a pretty intense PhD program. He is now a professor. But so when I asked him if he would just, check the copy out for me, there was this long pause, and I thought, oh, he's pretty busy and maybe he doesn't have time to stand over a copy machine and copy for me. But then what he said was, Mom, copyright laws? You're a lawyer. And I said it was out of print and all that. And he threw back at me something that I had said to him many times as he was growing up, which is, if you lose your integrity, you lose everything. So what I did was I Google translated the table of contents, guess which pages might be about the Kindertransport, and he went in and figured out from his university how many pages he could have without violating copyright, and he sent me 29 pages, which is what they said he could have. Those pages were in Dutch, which I don't speak or read. And actually, they turned out to be in Dutch and German, which was a challenge for the amazing translation team of Google Translate and yours truly. I would take a paragraph and paste it into Google Translate, and when it came out absolute gibberish, I would go hunting to see where the German was and pull that out and separately translate it and Tetris it all back together. I will tell you also that this was the very early days of Google Translate, and so it is not an elegant translation, but those 29 pages included some great detail about Truce's involvement in the Kindertransport effort. So that was really helpful to me. They included a short passage. It's this passage you're seeing here. So if you can read Dutch or German, maybe you'll know what it says. But it was about the major obstacle to Truce helping children escape by then Nazi-occupied Vienna, which was the German in charge of Vienna at the time. This guy, who's here with his wife, Vera, he has kids, he loved his mother, he's seen from many angles, he looks like a sort of a regular guy, but he's a young and ambitious, not yet infamous, as you guys know, Adolf Eichmann, the one who several years later would devise the final solution. He really was the man in charge of Nazi-occupied Austria at the time, and Truce faced him down. As extraordinary as that scene in the novel may seem to you, it is actually the way that it happened. It was described in that paragraph I just showed you, on that page I just showed you. But when I read that story, when I knew that story, then I knew that this was a book I had to write. You know, Toni Morrison once said that if there's a book you want to read and it hasn't yet been written, then you must write it. So this was a story I now had to write. I'm going to say Toni Morrison was given both a Pulitzer and a Nobel, and so I do listen to her advice. And I also hope you appreciate that nice segue away from Eichmann's photo. He's an ugly, evil dude. And this photo is of the Amsterdam Herrengracht. It inspired one of the scenes in the book. So there you go. And I also got to stay when I went on tour. One of the last things I got to do before this pandemic was, and actually first heard about the pandemic on my way home, was I did a tour of the Netherlands and Belgium, a number of events there, including a conversation with Ron Leopold, who's the head of the Anne Frank Center, and that was a real honor. So anyway, I enlisted a Dutch friend to help me find a copy of Truus's book, No Time for Tears, which is right here. There were no copies for sale anywhere in the Netherlands or anywhere else in the world. She finally got her library to borrow a copy from another library. She photocopied the whole thing for me then. Don't worry, nobody's integrity was jeopardized in this exercise because it turns out it's legal in the Netherlands to copy an out-of-print book. So. Then I gathered more images around me, including things like this bear a child brought with him. This dictionary, which I don't know, Ruth is going to tell us, I hope, if she had a dictionary like this or not, but I understand that most of the children took with them German to English dictionaries because very few of them spoke English. So let that sink in. They were allowed usually a single suitcase, and this is a real suitcase that one of the children brought. Most of them were sent by train to Hook of Holland and then by ferry to Harwich, and so they had ferry tickets. And I worked on buttoning down the details, which is more difficult than you imagine. One of the issues I had in buttoning down the dates was the date that the first Kindertransport left Vienna, because what I had was both the New York Times and a Times of London art pieces, just short little stringer pieces, which said that the children left on the Monday, that Truus actually has herself meeting with Adolf Eichmann, and Truus had everybody leaving on Saturday, which was the Sabbath. Now, it took me a long time to find the answer. I actually called the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. I talked to some historians there. They referred me to the Kindertransport Association. I talked to some people there, and what I was told was basically, there's a lot we don't know about the Kindertransports. But very late in the process, I came across this calendar. It's a boy's calendar, which clearly shows that he left not on the Monday, as the papers reported, but on the Saturday, on the Sabbath, as Truus had said, on the Sabbath when many were forbidden to travel. And that's, from the book, Eichmann's Little Joke. So then I started my somewhat weird writing process. I'm often asked how I write, pencil or keyboard, and the answer is basically any way I can, and doing everything I can. I journal ideas, I outline, I write a billion drafts, and I do this, which I call my card outline. And somebody described the other day as my board brain, or my brain board. I can't remember, but I thought that was really nice. But this looks really messy here, but let's just say this is the neat version. And in each of those cards represents a chapter in the book. The real story of the Kindertransport is so inspiring and uplifting. As Ruth said, one of the beautiful moments in a not very beautiful time, the risk people took to bring these children to safety, often putting their own lives at stake for the sake of strangers. Truly, we need more of that in the world today. And I'm really humbled by the response to the novel. It is a Jewish Book Award finalist and a bestseller in more languages than I can speak or read, and is published or forthcoming in 20 languages. And I'm really incredibly grateful to be a part of Truce becoming better known all over the world. This is a new statue honoring her in her hometown of Alkmaar in the Netherlands. But most humbling are the responses I've received from people like Ruth and Marion Wolf, who wrote to tell me she was number 211 on that first transport from Vienna. And she said, as Ruth did, that my novel was just like she remembered it. This fellow's name is Philip. He left Vienna when he was 5, and is, for those of you who've read the book, so like you would imagine Walter would be as a man. He came to one of my readings with his friend here, and he stayed afterwards, and we just talked for a long time, and it was so lovely to get to know him a little bit. This is Erica Opper, whose mother, Gertrude Ruth Friedman Opper, was on a 1938 Kindertransport from Vienna. She's pictured here with her granddaughter, Naomi, her great-granddaughter, Lucy, and her daughter, Erica. And when Erica gave me this photograph, she said they are 4 generations who literally would not exist if it were not for the goodness of strangers. And this last guy, I'll tell you, is Paul Alexander. Paul lives in Israel, and I haven't met him yet. But a friend of his sent him a copy of The Last Train to London in England. It was before it had come out in Hebrew. I have yet to see the Hebrew version, so I'm not getting to see anything because of COVID. But Paul was put on a transport when he was 1 year and 7 months old. And he wrote to tell me, I cried all the way through it. I read many books about the Kindertransport and the Holocaust, but your book, written so sensitively, is really special. It touched my heart from beginning to end. Thank you, Meg, for writing this book, and I can confirm, as you hope in your dedication, that your book more than does justice to my own story. So this photo is of Paul and his son and his grandson, and they retraced the path of his train 80 years later, so he's in his 80s, by bicycle. So honestly, if I thought before I was writing this that any of these families would be reading my story, I'm pretty sure I would have been too daunted to have written it. It is Truce's story and that of the children and their families, but as I wrote it, I held in my heart the silence of my son in that moment, before the moment he first brought the story of the Kindertransports to me. I hope it does them all justice, and that Truce will inspire everybody else the way she inspires me. I'm going to stop the screen share, and I'm going to do one other thing, which is I do have, the Last Train to London came out in the fall of 2019, and so I do now have a brand new book out. It's called The Postmistress of Paris. It is, I'm just going to read you the description because I don't know. It is, Meg Waite Clayton revisits the dark early days of German occupation of France in this haunting novel, a love story and a tale of high-stakes danger and incomparable courage about a young American heiress who helps artists hunted by the Nazis escape from war-torn Europe. It is a rescue story like the Kindertransports in some ways. It draws from, if you know who Varian Fry was this American who went over with a list of prominent artists and writers and intellectuals and Nobel laureates and people like that he could get American visas for, to bring them to the United States, if only he could get them out of France. This was after Hitler had invaded France. And so it draws from that, and the Postmistress is a code name for a woman who is a character who is based in part on a real Chicago heiress named Mary Jane Gold, who was involved in this effort and provided a lot of the funding for it after the initial funding. I'm really, really delighted to say, I think you can see behind me some of those foreign editions to The Last Train to London. The Postmistress of Paris has only been out for 2 weeks today, as a matter of fact. It has already been a People magazine pick, a Book of the Month pick, a whole lot of, USA Today recommends it, blah, blah, blah. And then Friday, it was announced as the new Good Morning America Buzz book. So it was very exciting. It's just, it's getting a lot of attention, and it comes at a time that's just very important to me to have it. So it's dedicated to my mom, who has terminal lung cancer, and I've been able to share all these moments with her. So that's been very, very special. Taking her People magazine, taking her the Chicago Tribune piece, and watching with her the Good Morning America piece was really nice. So I think with that, I will turn it over to you guys and see if we can take some questions.
Okay, that was a great presentation. I am going to take 2 seconds. Again, this is Lauren Thompson from the Meriden Public Library. I am going to give away 2 copies of The Postmistress of Paris and 1 copy of The Last Train to London. Now, we've already got the winners picked, so just reach out to us. We do have phone numbers and emails, so we'll be able to get in touch with you and get your copy mailed to you sometime this week. Now, the first winner is Mark Altenberger. You have won a copy of The Postmistress of Paris. If you're here, give me a thumbs up just so I know. And then the second winner is Linda Walter from the Bloomfield Public Library. Yes. Linda Walter from the Bloomfield Public Library, you have won a copy of The Postmistress of Paris as well. Now, the winner of The Last Train to London is, where's my star? Krista Penrose. Krista Penrose, are you here? Give me a quick shout out in the chat. You have won a copy of The Last Train to London.
Yay, thank you.
Yay.
You're welcome. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mara and Sheila from Bloomfield Public Library.
Hi, everybody, and we are thrilled to be involved with this wonderful program. It has been a pleasure to work with Lauren, and Ruth is our new best friend. I am with my colleague, Sheila McCullum, and we are going to take care of facilitating the questions. We are hoping you can put questions into the chat or raise your hand. And I am going to start because I have the first question that I really am excited to ask you, Meg, which is I would love to know what happened to Stefan.
Well, of course, Stefan is a fictional person, so it's it's hard to say. I will say that when I first imagined the book, I thought I would take it much further and follow the children after they further into their time in England. But then I realized at some point in time that to do that would be, a 1,000-page book, and I am not a writer of 1,000-page books. There is some possibility that I will write a sequel that would follow the children because I am so close to them. But I felt so drained after I wrote it that I didn't feel I was ready to do that yet. But I will talk to you about, and this is part of what intrigues me and why I might write a sequel, what happened to the children, which is any measure of different things. The experiences depended so much on where they ended up when they got to England, what their families were like, whether they ended up reunited with their own families or not. And so the experience of the children were literally as varied as the number of children who were rescued. But many of the boys who were Stefan's age, because they were older, they when England entered the war, they were considered enemy aliens, and so many of them were interned, often with Nazis, in internment camps. Many of them were sent to Canada, the idea being that they would be further away and less dangerous. And in the end, many of them, because they spoke German, later in the war, they would join the armed services and come back as spies because they could speak fluent German, and you couldn't necessarily tell that they weren't like any other Germans. So yeah, but the long story short is most of the children were not reunited with their families. Many of them ended up in the United States for a variety of reasons, and they, as a group, the children rescued in the kinder transport were extraordinarily remarkable. I think for something that is not that many children, they produced 2 Nobel laureates, many people who went on to do extraordinary things, and coming out of the most difficult circumstances. I think it's a group to be greatly admired.
Thank you very much. We do have a question from Ruth Borsuck. She would like to know if and how you chose the cover image of the book.
Oh, I did not choose it. Well, I did and I didn't. So, one of the beautiful things about publishing a book is you just have to be the writer. You don't have to be the artist, and somebody else takes care of all that. But so that is, we went through many, many covers. Let's see if I can do this without collapsing everything. We went through many, many covers before we came to this one, and we went through it. We always had the kind of the structure, but what was going on down here was a whole bunch of different things. And the first one was like basically Disney Central casting children, and it just didn't work, and we kept looking for things. And then finally somebody came up with this boy, and they put this boy on the cover, and I said, that's it. And I took it to my mother, and she said, that's it. But where is his Peter Rabbit? Because he drags around that Peter Rabbit, and so we explored whether we could put a Peter Rabbit on the cover, and we could not for a variety of reasons. But I so love that cover. I think it's beautiful, and it's something that you really have no control over because, one, you're the author, you're not the artist, and two, in most contracts, this is that was my 7th novel, so I'm far enough along that I can at least negotiate to have consultation rights for the cover, which means they have to ask me if I like it. But even if I say, no, I hate it, they can still use it. So my team at HarperCollins is wonderful. They worked with me on making, for both of these books, on making something that that everybody thought was beautiful. And yeah, but that's where it came from. I did actually send, I sent them some idea shots basically, and one of them was one of the real train stations, and I think that's where this idea of this of the train station at the top comes in. But, yeah, thanks. It's fun, once your book is done and then people are presenting it, it's very fun to see so many beautiful things, like even the font. You're like, oh, that's such a beautiful font. It's a funny thing, but it comes alive, and the first time you hold a new book in your hand is honestly very like holding a child when they're first born, so it's, oh look, it has fingers and toes. It's beautiful. So yeah,
You birthed a wonderful baby.
Leonie Kramer says there's a documentary film called Truce's Children, which I recently watched through the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And she's wondering if anybody else saw it.
Yeah, I'm going to say that I, in the many great experiences I had in this book, I got to the Kinder Transport, I think when the book was done, but before it was published, when it was in production, Kinder Transport was retracing, a group from the Kinder Transport Association were retracing the steps of the path that they went on for their 80th anniversary. And I had met Melissa Hacker, who's the president, and she invited me. I was going to be in Paris anyway, and so she invited me up to Amsterdam to join them there. And at that gathering in Amsterdam, we were talking to Pamela, who's one of the filmmakers for that, and we got to see some early footage of that, and that was really fun. It turns out that that Pamela had found Truce about the same time I did, from a different angle, and so we were both working on these stories in parallel without knowing that each other existed. But it is a really wonderful. What Pamela did was she found many of the survivors, many of the people that Truce had rescued, both in the Kinder Transport and then in some later in the war things that she did. And she brought them together and interviewed them and made a film out of it, and it's really lovely. I highly recommend it if anybody's looking for something to watch.
Roberta Glass would like to know, did you get any feedback from anyone who knew Truce?
As a matter of fact, I did. Long story short, Truce died childless. You know, in the book, she doesn't have children, and in fact, she didn't ever have children. And so I knew that I was not going to find any of her heirs. But it turned out through a random, you know, as things happen, through a random set of circumstances, after the book was written and published, I was interviewed on stage by somebody who happened to know Truce's grand nephew, I think he was, and he's somebody who knew Truce, and we ended up communicating, and you know, hearing some of the stories that he tells are some of the stories that are, you know, in the book, and that was really fun, and it was quite lovely to have him, you know, just respond. So yeah.
Okay, Ruth Borsak has a question. Having so much invested emotionally in the writing, how involved is the translation to other languages?
Oh, you know, it's interesting. So obviously I don't speak those languages. I mean, I speak a little French, and I don't think the French edition has come out yet. That pushed it to next year because of COVID. But I don't, it's a weird thing, this translation, you know, because I have no idea what it says, and I don't have any way of knowing. So I just have to kind of trust that whoever is translating it is doing a good job. I do sometimes get reach out from my foreign publishers and foreign translators, but it's surprising how much of that just goes out into the world, and especially with this one, because it was in lockdown. We were in lockdown. We were in the pandemic before a lot of the foreign editions came out, and so they would come out, and I wouldn't even know it. And like, we all have Google alerts, my team at HarperCollins and myself, to tell us when things show up. But like let's see, this is the Bulgarian edition, I think, or maybe it's the Russian edition. And as you can see, my name does not even look like my name there. It is that right there is my name.
Right.
And so that wouldn't even show up on a Google alert. And so a lot of times, you know, the first I knew that it was out in Russia was my Russian publisher reached out to me because they wanted to buy the book before this called Beautiful Exiles, and that's how I knew it was out in Russian, because it was doing really well in Russian and they wanted to buy another book. So it's kind of strange. Yeah.
So nobody is actually approaching you and interviewing you or trying to.
Yes, sometimes they do. And so a lot of times, like in Brazil, it was picked by, you know, it's kind of like the equivalent of Reese Witherspoon in the United States, a Brazilian TV star who does this little book show. And it was picked by her for her book club. And so they asked me if I would do a little video, and I'm often asked to do little videos, and then they show up on the internet with, you know, because I only speak English, right? But with a translation of what I'm saying into some other language. So often they do, but as often they don't. So sometimes it just all happens without me. It's kind of, and you know, sometimes it does better. I was like, the last in London did pretty well in the United States. In Canada, where I had literally one event for the book, it ended up number 3 on their bestseller list, and number 1 and 2 were literally Stephen King and Margaret Atwood. So, and I did talk to the people at HarperCollins in Canada about what they were doing and everything, but I look at the success of it there, and I go, that is all them, because there was nothing I did to make that happen. Yeah,
Thanks.
it's a village. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have another question for you, Meg. Can you tell us a little bit more about your writing process of weaving truths with real people and made up characters?
Yeah, of course. So I do write these historical fiction stories that are based on or inspired by real stories. I like to find a real story that that moves me emotionally, and then figure out how I can make it into a story that hopefully will move other people emotionally. And so it's always a question of, are you going to use this a real person, or are you going to fictionalize them? So in this book, because Truce's story is very close to Truce's real story, I kept her name, called her Truce, and gave her. I wanted to do that because I wanted everybody to know who she really was. I felt, especially for Truce, she's been so forgotten, and she was so extraordinary. And I'm not to take away from Nicholas Winton, but he has become the face of the Kindertransport, and he saved 700 people from Czechoslovakia very late in the process, many months after Truce had been working on this. So I really wanted her out there as the face of this book, and so I stuck really close to her personal story for the book. The liberties I took were things like, we know she was childless, but she was childless at a time when women didn't talk about why they weren't having children, whether they couldn't or whether they did. We don't know, for example, if she really had miscarriages or if she never conceived at all. And so that is some fiction that I filled in to make her story emotionally resonant. Maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't. If I'm using a real person, Sam, I don't like to include things that I know to be untrue, especially if they would not reflect positively on that person. And so in that kind of situation, like Adolf Eichmann, I did a ton of research on Eichmann so that I could deliver his story, make him a real person. I felt that was a really important point of view, because I think we all imagine we might be Truce, and none of us imagines that we might be Eichmann, but some of us are Eichmann. And that is, I felt it was really important to show that he was a man who loved his wife and his kids and thought he was a good person, because I feel it's really important for us all to be vigilant to the evil in ourselves. And so Eichmann's story is very clear to the thing. For things like, like for the children, I did not want to take any one person's personal story and put that in my book. I felt that would be too intrusive. I know that this was a very difficult circumstance for everybody who went through it, even when it ended relatively well. And so what I did there was I collected a whole bunch of stories, as many as I could find almost, and listened to them, read them. I went up to the Holocaust Museum here in San Francisco, and they pulled all Kindertransport stories, like basically all of them that they had. And I read through them, and then I really focused on especially the ones in Vienna, which is where much of the detail and much of the emotion comes from. But then I took those stories and then I set them aside and I made up those characters and informed their experiences from the stuff that I had found in my research. And that's often how I interweave them. For the Postmistress of Paris, for that novel, the kind of heroine in that novel is it's inspired by two women. One is Mary Jane Golden, the other is Lisa Fitko. Because it was not either of their real experiences, and Mary Jane Gold, for example, her love story is, she fell in love with a Marseille mobster. And it's a really interesting story, but it's totally off point of the book. And so I took that character and I gave her a fictional name, the name of Nane, so that, and I say this is, this book is inspired by Mary Jane Gold and Lisa Fitko, and this book is really very much based on the life of Truce Weissmuller, the things that Truce Weissmuller did. And how you make that, I don't know how you decide to do that. It has to do with the shape of the story and what you want to tell and how you're best going to deliver the emotion that you want to deliver, I guess. Does that answer the question?
There's a few comments too. Judy Marita said, my husband is Cuban and came to the United States on a program fashioned after the Kindertransport called the Pedro Pan Kids. And 1,400 children came this way.
I didn't know about that.
Let me see, there's another one. I'm having trouble getting these guys. Hold on a minute. Let me see if I make it bigger. Eve Fogelman says, is anyone a researcher on the Zoom, the Kastenberg Holocaust Child Survivor Archive at Hebrew University, Israel National Library, and Yad Vashem have 50 interviews on Kiddush transport children donated by Melissa Hacker. And then this is not a question. Another thank you to you, Meg. This is from Ali Gamo again. As I was reading the book, I couldn't understand how she was able to be so accurate. Excuse me, it was so similar to the firsthand stories that I grew up hearing. I'm so glad to know you've utilized the, is it Shoah? Audio testimonials. I'm lucky enough to have my mother's recorded testimony there as well. You did a wonderful job.
Oh, thank you. And I just want to say thank you. I mean, I think those capturing those stories is so important. And thank you to your mother for doing that. I think I know from watching so many of these, especially the video interviews, that it was often very painful to remember for the people who had been the children. But it's important that we all remember, and we can't remember if we don't have the details of what happened. So so thank you to your mother for sharing that with everybody.
And I have a question, Meg. In the book, Sophie's always talking about her paradoxes. Can you explain like what your purpose was in putting all those in? I was feeling like maybe I was missing something.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, Sophie's a mathematician, right? I mean, she's a little math prodigy. And so I needed, in order to make, I mean, why was she math prodigy? I don't know, but she came to me as a math prodigy. And so I needed to, and I think part of it is just that so many of these children were extraordinary. And so I wanted my children to be extraordinary too. And so what I did, kind of back-ended into that, what I did was I looked for some math that was happening in Vienna at the time that she could be involved in. And so I came on this real mathematician who really was at the University of Vienna when my fictional Zophie studies with him. And that's the work that he was doing. For me anyway, and I am a little math nerdy kind of person, so maybe there's more math in there than both my children are mathematicians now. One is a theoretical economist, and one is a startup guy who does the technical side, but they both basically do math all the time. That's them. And so I thought that the things that she was exploring in her math, and especially this this very simple idea that 1 is always greater than 0, which starts as just her having one friend instead of no friends, and then comes to echo the fact that just one person acting can make a huge difference in the world. That's what I was going for, basically.
Thank you. Okay, are there any more questions? Have we missed anybody?
We have a question from Ruth Borsak. She said, now that the Postmistress of Paris is out in print, what is next?
That's Ruth, did my editor send you? I will tell you that my 5th novel is a novel called The Last Train to London. No, it's called The Race for Paris. And it's about these women journalists in World War II hoping to be the first to report the liberation of Paris. When my second book, which is called The Wednesday Sisters, was being published, people would ask me what was next, and I'd say, well, I have this, my publisher actually, I have this great idea for this World War II novel about women journalists, and it was not until I stopped saying that was going to be my next book that it finally became my next book. And so as a result, I feel very superstitious about talking about what I'm writing next. I will tell you that the current plan is to have another World War II story set in Paris. And if I do this story, it will be a book about books. And that's about all I know right now. So I have a very specific real event that I'm going to be drawing from. So that'll be it. Paris, 1942-3, that time. Which, of course, is just an excuse to go back to Paris, you know.
I have one last question for you. Have any of your books been turned into movies, or the thought of turning them into movies?
They have not yet, and knock on wood, hopefully they will be. It's interesting, the Last Train to London, I wrote it first as a screenplay, actually. I'd never written a screenplay before, but I was very daunted by the idea of taking on this story. So I thought, I'll just write it as a screenplay. I'm never going to have a screenplay done for anything anyway, and so it'll just be fun, and I can explore the story in a kind of a no pressure. This is never going to have to be anything kind of atmosphere. Long story short, I showed it to my husband. He said, "Oh, this is great. What are you going to do with it?" And I said, "It's a screenplay. I'm going to use it to outline a novel." And he said, "No, it's really good as a screenplay. You should do something with it." And so I submitted it and ended up being chosen as one of 12 women of a certain age, being over 40, to have this amazing experience at something called the Writers Lab, which is Meryl Streep, Nicole Kidman, Oprah Winfrey, and I think somebody else now also sponsor it. And what they do is they bring 12 women together for an intensive screenwriting retreat. And I got to work with Robin Swicord, among other people, who was Oscar nominated for Benjamin Button. And she taught me so much about screenwriting. And I spiffied up the screenplay, and I have a film agent, and so my film agent started circulating it. And we actually had a Dutch filmmaker who was very interested in doing it. And then, but the manuscript went out basically at the end of February of 2020, right before the pandemic began. And then making film became very complicated, and especially making expensive $50 million films, which is what this would be. And so it didn't, that kind of fell apart, and it's never gone anywhere. And right now, my film agent is starting to take out The Postmistress of Paris, which also started as a screenplay, but I haven't gone back to that screenplay yet. So she's just taking it out as a book, and we'll see. Fingers crossed. I would love to have them. I would love to have any of my books made into movies. I'm a reader, but I'm also a big film fan, and I think movies bring readers to books, and so I would love that. Yeah, thank you.
From all three librarians, we love the fact that you love books and libraries. And I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, who has been an incredible librarian throughout this, done a great job.
Thank you. In closing, I want to thank everybody for coming. Meg, I want to thank you most importantly for coming to talk to us. We appreciate you taking the time out. And I know you've got a very busy schedule, and you've got this new book coming out. And you taking time to talk to us really just makes the difference. We really enjoyed reading your book. And I do want to, again, thank Ruth for planting the seed for this program, and really just having, that light bulb moment of let's reach out to the author. And being quite honest, Meg, you responded within like 5 minutes, which was kind of phenomenal for me. There was a little dance in my office.
Well, that's surprising, because I'm usually not that on top of my emails, but that's wonderful. And I want to just echo, I just want to hop in here to say, thank you, Ruth, for making this happen, all you guys for making this happen, and everybody for being here. Really lovely. And now I'm going to shut up.
Thank you. So yes, everyone have a great night. Take a look at our events page. In the new year, we should have some new events coming out. I hope to work with Bloomfield and Voices of Hope again in the future. This has been a wonderful collaboration, and without, you know, hard workers like all of you in your organizations, programs like this just don't happen. And yes, so thank you everyone and have a good night from the Meriden Public Library.